What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 88 of Nintendo Noise, Flip Screen Games' weekly Nintendo podcast. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined today by a very special guest, Mr. Chris Brandrick, editor of Switch Weekly.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome back to the show, Chris. It's great to have you back.
Thanks. Appreciate you taking the time to have me back on.
Yeah, of course. I mean, literally. It seems like I don't know that we've had you on since the last State of Switch. So we'll have to make this a more regular occurrence. But of course, the 6th annual State of Switch survey has dropped just this week. So we had to have you on and talk through all the data as we have the last what is this, 3 years in a row?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, it's become a bit of a time-honored tradition, and the audience was very excited to see you return. To talk about the results this year. And I want to kick things off with one from Andrew Valentine, who said, as a long-term Switch Weekly reader, I guess I'm interested in the process behind the newsletter. How long does it take to produce? Any interesting anecdotes about making it? And what are your medium/long-term goals or ambitions for it?
Oh, okay. Really meta question to kick things off then.
Yeah.
I've been doing it since 2016, which is crazy because it's pre-Switch. Yeah, it takes me probably about 2-3 hours a week to put the newsletter together. The bulk of that time is putting a list of upcoming games together because for those who don't know, it's a weekly newsletter that I put together, and it kind of has the best Nintendo reads from across the web, along with a list of all the upcoming games and some memey kind of fun stuff at the end. But the upcoming game stuff is what takes the most of my time because I kind of write a short pithy description of each one, which means I have to go look at these games and see what they are. And the Nintendo Switch, even 6 years in, it's insane the amount of games that are coming out for this platform still. Last week, there was over 40 games coming out on the eShop. So yeah, that takes quite a chunk of time to kind of go through all of those and actually discern if any of them are any good. And most of them aren't. So.
And having to formulate opinions on games you haven't played just based on some footage, being this looks promising, maybe. I don't know. It's definitely.
Or this looks like trash mobile ports. There's a lot of that.
For sure.
But I try and keep fairly kind about things. But yeah, that's the biggest chunk of time for sure.
So
generally 2-3 hours a week.
So then, how about the medium long term goals or ambitions for it? Because I know when we talked about the foundation of it on one of our previous catch ups,
sure.
I remember you saying that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel as though I remember you saying that you had snagged the name for Switch Weekly the day or the day after that the Switch was revealed. So this is obviously a project, like you said, that's been going for even longer than the Switch itself.
It was the October before the March that it came out in 2017. They had that kind of a reveal trailer, didn't they? And that's when they first announced the name. So yeah, within minutes of that trailer dropping, I was registering that domain name because in my day job, I work at a newsletter company. It's all about web technologies and stuff, so it's not related, but all of them are, technology weekly, X, Y, Z weekly sort of thing. So I kind of had that in my head. I'll do a weekly newsletter around this, So I snagged that straight away, yeah. But and I've just been doing it ever since. And it's crazy that I've been doing this over 6 years. But in terms of long-term stuff, I may well have mentioned this to you on the podcast last year, and it just goes to show how slow I am with certain things. But in terms of my longer term plans, I need to rebrand it and move away from the Switch name because the Switch name isn't going to be here forever. I've got ideas on what I'm going to do there, but there are plans are kind of around a bigger thing, but I don't want to.
You got to hope they call it the Switch 2.
Say too much.
You can just.
Well, that would be easy. I just keep the same name, but I can't see that happening. But I know what I want to call it. It's just a case of actually making the change. So its long-term kind of viability is secured, I guess.
For sure. Yeah. Branding is always the toughest stuff with anything like this because it's, I'm sure having the Switch Weekly name in 2016 was a huge boon, and now you're staring down the next console generation. It's okay. Just much like exactly. Nintendo themselves, how do we bring the audience to the sequel? Yeah,
and the thing with Nintendo is they're so wildly unpredictable in terms of what they could name things. Who saw the Wii coming? They could call it anything. So yeah, I kind of want to get away from it having a console-based name. And you saw this a lot. I remember there was a website I used to go on, which was this is to show my age, N64 Europe or something and then it was Cube Europe, and then it was Revolution Europe, and then they changed it to just N Europe to just avoid the kind of problem going forward.
Yes.
So yeah, it's one of those things.
So I'm always interested in, this being a project that you've, had going on all this time. What is it that motivates you to keep doing the survey specifically year over year, considering, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, as you said, right, the newsletter itself takes you, 2 to 3 hours a week, and then the survey is a like months long project, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things that I kind of start thinking about in January. Start putting it together like the first couple of weeks of February and like put it out in the middle of February, and then it's open for a few weeks, and then I spend the rest of March kind of going through the results and writing up my results. It's taken me a bit longer this year because I stupidly decided to go on vacation like 2 days after the survey closed. So, but sometimes you got to do these things for yourself. Um, so yeah, it's a long process for sure. And in terms of doing it, there are times where I'm like, why am I keep doing this? But I've gotten to a point now where I started it like 1 year into the Switch's life, and we're 6 years in, and I want to keep doing it year in, year out, just so I have a complete kind of
Yeah.
picture of the whole like console lifespan. And at the end of it, I can do some sort of grand thing with all the data, maybe. I don't know. Figure that out when I get there and cross that bridge when I get there. But yeah, the idea being that there will be some sort of big retrospective about how the kind of popular opinion around the console ebbed and flowed throughout the 6, 7, 8 years, whatever it may be.
I feel like you got to do a book or something, like I feel like you got to like get
Yeah.
all the raw data somewhere where everybody can, really dig
Yeah.
into it, because it's so much. I mean, obviously, seeing you get into it and break it down and kind of contextualize it is, I think, what makes it good content. But if you're
Mm.
somebody who is obsessive enough to want to go that extra mile, like you do, right,
Yeah.
and want to really dig in the
Yeah.
data, something like that could be really cool.
Yeah. And it's having that kind of ebb and flow as well as like knowing which questions to keep, which ones to kind of add in. Um, there's a lot to it in terms of like my process, but then also I'm like, I wish I could spend 10 more, the amount of 10x the amount of time that I've actually got to spend on this thing. Cause like I say, it's just a side project, but in terms of the actual justice, I could do it, man. But yeah, you could go all in, and yeah, I've got time for that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of my favorite sayings about being a creative, is that perfect is the enemy of finished, right? It's like
Exactly. Yeah.
you gotta put it out at some point, right? Someday you gotta
Yeah.
press publish. So
Yeah. You got to
um,
put a pin in it.
I am very eager to jump into all the data here, but just real quick before we do that, I do just want to give you the opportunity to tell folks how they can go find not only the survey, which we're going to get into here, and I definitely implore you to go check out the full post for yourself, but also
Yeah.
how they can subscribe to Switch Weekly and where they can find you and all the other stuff that you're
Sure.
doing.
Yeah, it's kind of tricky in terms of knowing where to find me because what do you do anymore? Do you promote Twitter? Is that the thing, or do you promote Mastodon? I don't know. Either way, I'm Chris Brandrick on both. But yeah, I don't know. Ick.
It's not a fun
um,
situation.
no, but the whole thing with Switch Weekly, yeah, it's switchweekly.com. That's where you can find the newsletter, and I send one newsletter every Sunday, nothing else. You don't get any crap in between. So I respect your inbox is the kind of mantra that I've stuck to the past 6 years, and it seems to have worked. But yeah, the newsletter's there. It's like 8,500 people think it's worth opening, so that's okay. As for the survey itself, if you go to switchweekly.com/survey, you can find all the past 6 years reports. You should be able to anyway if the link works. And if you go to switchweekly.com/survey/2023, you can read this year's write up.
Don't worry, the link works. I just checked it.
Cool.
And we'll have it down below for everybody who wants to go check it out for themselves. Like I said, definitely go give it a click. Show Chris some love. We always love getting to have you on to talk about this. So everybody
Appreciate
make
it.
sure you go and show him some love. All right. So I want to start off this part with my favorite question to ask you every time we do this, Chris, which is what is
Okay.
the data point that you found most interesting or shocking this year?
Um, it's one of those things that's actually quite hard to kind of quantify in the data itself. It's more kind of through there are a few opportunities throughout the kind of survey where I open it up to kind of like feedback and comments from people, and a lot of them obviously you only see like a snapshot of these in the actual report because otherwise it would be endless. But a lot of them it was just around the performance of the Switch, and I think we've seen that kind of tide turn in the past 12 months specifically in terms of the number of conversations that a lot of people seem to be having around it's old hardware or the performance is an issue. And, that's ramped up dramatically in the past 12 months is the number one thing that I kind of noticed when going through it.
So that was the thing that stood out to me as well, right? There were a
Mm.
couple quotes from your blog post I want to pull real quick, right? Where you said you were talking about the Switch as a success, right? As kind of the
Hmm.
intro to the piece. And you say, however,
Sure.
despite this year after year success story, it does feel that during the past 12 months, there have been early signs of a shift in favorability for the platform, chiefly in faithful gaming circles, but notable all the same. There's been an
Mm.
uptick in folks not only discussing what may be next, but also lamenting, rightly or wrongly, the Switch's now aging hardware and the limitations such a machine faces in 2023.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting, especially in the context of you had a note near the top where last year there were roughly 5,000 responses to the survey, whereas this year it
Hmm.
was closer to 2,500.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm interested in kind of how common that dip is. Like, is that something you've seen a lot over the last 6 years, where it ebbs and flows based on kind of the general response to the Switch? And were you
Yeah.
surprised to see the fewer respondents this year? And like, does that speak to you about, I guess, like general enthusiasm about the
Yeah.
Switch, even amongst its most hardcore fans?
Yeah, I think it did kind of a top level thing. Yes, I did kind of think, oh, half the people that responded last year came back and did it this year, and is that just interest in the platform is waning? There's no kind of passion to come and tell me what they think about it. But another thing is I'm just at the whim of, like, who picks this up and decides to promote it for me. I've only got the audience I've got with the newsletter. Um, like this year, a lot of the respondents come via Reddit. I think it was like 60% or something. But the year prior, like 70% of the respondents came via like the media, the gaming press, like sites like Nintendo Life, who picked it up and ran a story on it. And this year they didn't. So it just, I'm at the kind of whim of like which big outlets pick it up, or, which big Twitter accounts push it and things like that. But generally, yes, I do feel is like, oh, I can't be bothered to fill out that survey again because I don't care about the Switch so much this year. And that might just kind of speak to the kind of trend in general. That kind of ties back to the discussion around the hardware just kind of feeling a bit long in the tooth, maybe.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think there were a couple other bits of data that surprised me because they seem to
Hmm.
kind of contradict that sentiment, which seems to,
Okay.
like, there was, like, here was one. We're going to jump around a little bit here. This was later on, right? This is one of your last questions. You asked, how many more years do folks want Nintendo to continue supporting the Switch platform, right? Most
Yeah.
common reply, 25% of responses, was an additional 2 years.
Hmm.
And then the average came out, like, across all responses, was closer to 4 years, which
Yeah.
seems insane to me, right? Because it's
Yeah.
like,
Right.
are we tired of it or are we not?
Yeah, I know it's weird, and it kind of goes back to last year's survey. And I mean, I'm try and pull it up here while I'm talking to you, but I seem to believe like last year, the same sort of question garnered a even greater response in terms of the number of years that people wanted to see it going. Let's have a look here. I got it here.
They're like
Um,
2030.
y- Literally last year, yeah, the average response was a further 6 years, which would have taken it into 2028. So to see it come down a bit this year also does kind of tie into the fatigue around the platform a bit, but still, it's still a long way out in terms of people's desire for the platform to live on it. And I don't know if that's just people kind of wanting to hold on to the Switch kind of hybrid nature and the model itself, um, or just them wanting Nintendo to support the platform. It's hard to know in terms of what people are actually thinking when they say that.
What would you say you chalk that up to? Like, do you think that it's purely a performance issue at this point? Whereas if, like, the Switch's hardware wasn't starting to show its age as much, considering that was such a common response,
Mm.
um, that folks would still be all in on it? Or, like, have we? Because I mean, the last couple of years, there's also been, I guess depending on what your tastes are, I've seen several folks complain that they haven't felt as though the exclusives were hitting as hard
Mm.
across the board. Whereas you look at first couple years of the Switch, and it felt like every
Yeah.
year there were at least two or three big games that appealed to most of the audience.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, in response to kind of the software library, I think a lot of the low hanging fruit for Nintendo has gone, hasn't it? In terms of their,
Sure.
their their heavy hitters. I mean, there's nothing stopping them doing sequels like they're doing with Tears of the Kingdom. Um, like, give us another Mario Odyssey. Give us like we can get into that, but um, in terms of the actual platform overall, in terms of how people perceive it, and it's tough to know because there's kind of areas where is it a case of they just want to move on to the next thing and they want it to be backwards compatible and that's the fear, or I don't know, it's kind of, I lost my train of thought a little bit there, but yeah, generally it's kind of tough to put you kind of finger on it and say that's the reason why, but
Yeah, and it's funny because I feel like I saw a lot of myself as a Switch owner in some of these responses, right? Like
Okay.
I love the Switch, right? I think if you were to ask me what my favorite Nintendo console is,
Mm.
all said
It's
and
it's it's up there.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, right? If it's not there, it's up there, right? I mean, it's
Mm.
been such a great piece of hardware. I think for its life cycle, I think it has a great library. It has a lot of really good
Mhm.
features. But I also last year remember feeling like, boy, in the 6 years I've had my Nintendo Switch, like this is the least I've played it, And I bought
Yeah.
the OLED. I got
Yeah.
a new Switch, and I'm still like, the
Okay.
the Steam Deck took a lot of that oxygen for me,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah.
and
And I mean, you do see that kind of reflected in some of the data points because, like, I ask how often do you think you play it, like in a given week, or I can't remember exactly how I phrased the question, but generally the play time is down year on year. I think last year it was like on average someone would play it for 6.5 hours a week, whereas this year it's closer to just 5 hours dead. So playtime is down year over year. In terms of like people's Switch libraries, like the average number of games, sorry, the median number of games that people have is 35, and that is exactly the same as it was last year. So it seems to have stalled in terms of like people picking up games, or you know, in just terms of like the general library and stuff. It's I don't know. It just feels like we've reached a sort of apex point with it all,
yeah, it's
and
like
that was kind of the takeaway.
it feels like there isn't a lot of uncharted territory left, and
That's
I
fair.
I wonder if that's part of it, especially with now this year having Tears of the Kingdom feels like such a
Mm,
bookend. It's like, how can we
yeah.
possibly have a bigger game on this console than a sequel to its biggest game that was a launch title?
Yeah.
Not biggest in terms of
Everyone,
sales, but in terms of
everyone's forgetting about Pikmin 4.
that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm very excited for a Pikmin 4,
No,
but I
yeah,
can't imagine it's gonna move the needle in that same way.
no. I think the true bookend is probably going to be Metroid Prime 4, isn't it? Because that's going to end up being, I reckon, cross gen.
Yeah.
That'll be the kind of start at the beginning. But the actual conversation around the hardware being tired and it having problems, I think it's a tough one to kind of I don't know, square, because like it's clearly not an issue when it comes to Nintendo software. Because I mean, you look at a game like, I know it's a weird comparison because it's a 20-year-old game, but you look at a game like Metroid Prime Remastered and it looks
Sure.
great and it runs great. Um, you can still do really good things with this hardware, considering it's like a 7-year-old chip or whatever it's 7, 8-year-old chip at this point. Um,
I think there's a pretty good
it's
chance the
me,
game of the year of 2023 is about to come out on it, right? So
yeah, exactly, yeah,
obviously it still has juice and it still sells
yeah,
incredibly well, right? Like to the average consumer, there's
yeah.
still a lot of love for the Switch. Never seen a
Yeah,
price cut. That was the thing you
which
pointed
kind of
out,
yeah, and the
That's
fact that
insane.
Nintendo have still got that lever to pull when things slow down for the Switch, they can still go, "Oh, here you go, $50 price cut." That's insane that they can still do that. Um, but yeah, you touched upon something there, that I think is quite important, is that you said like for the general masses, this console can still pack a punch, and there's still a really great library. If they have a price cut, it's really really compelling all of a sudden. The people answering this survey are enthusiasts. I mean, yeah, 46% of those answering the survey this year got their Switch within launch or the first year. So
Right.
these are long time Switch users, and they're enthusiast crowds because they've got big libraries of games. I mean, the average response on number of games owned is like in the 60s or something. So that's why I have to do a median take, because that's insane. Um, because there are people here with like thousands of games answering this survey. So it's a really enthusiast crowd. So, if you're speaking to the hardcore, then you're going to get really impassioned kind of responses to these things. So for them to kind of be moaning about the kind of performance of the console, and, you, it makes sense. These are the people who care the most. So for them to kind of put this up as a red flag kind of makes sense perfectly.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because again, right, like there is like when you ask people what their overall feeling was, right, the satisfaction is generally pretty high. I think the number you called out was like 4.4 out of 5, right, was how
Yeah.
they gauged their satisfaction. But then again, you compare that with weekly playtime being around by around 24%. That is a huge reduction, and
Yeah.
however you want to chalk that up, whether it's because there were less compelling pieces of software, new handhelds on the market like the Steam Deck, or just people maybe
Hmm.
playing on other platforms, because you also get into that with a lot of the respondents own a PlayStation console, a lot of them own an
Yeah.
Xbox console, like it's about a quarter of them, right, own a
Mhm.
PlayStation. So,
Yeah.
like there,
I think that's where a lot of the performance stuff comes in.
yeah,
If the core of the people answering this survey have a PS5, just comparatively, it's like it's no
Yeah,
contest.
it's a
It's
night
a
and
joke. It's a
day.
joke.
You know,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And like, you're so we talk about this all the time on this show, right? Where like
Mm,
the quote unquote, next gen, now current gen consoles, I think they really
mm,
did color how I felt about the Switch because, there are things like not having to sit through load times that I've
yeah,
started to kind of take for granted. And when
right.
you do have a game that takes a little bit longer or it chugs or, I put it on the dock and the draw distance is, a third of what I would get on one of
Yeah,
the other consoles, like it
yeah,
does make some of those things feel a little bit more glaring. And,
yeah,
there was so long where I think the Switch, even when it wasn't, it could never compete on a graphical level, it had the novelty of being the handheld and the hybrid
yeah.
system. And now that we do have, this whole handheld PC market starting to
This
emerge,
boon. Yeah.
for the folks that took the plunge, the million people that bought a Steam Deck, like, I bet you there are a lot of folks like the 200 and some odd that responded to the survey that are like me.
Hmm.
I wonder how many of them felt motivated by being like, man, the performance is a bummer considering, on my Steam Deck, I can play Elden Ring, right? I can't do that on my
Yeah.
Switch.
No, exactly. I think, yeah, the Switch laid the kind of groundwork for a lot of what we're seeing now in terms of the PC gaming space and just kind of legitimizing it and just getting people comfortable to the idea, and in terms of having these full fat experiences on the go. But yeah, when you can compare, it's a tough sell, isn't it? And it's the whole kind of grass is greener thing, and you don't know till you know. And then once you do know, it's like, damn, this is different. However, the Steam Deck is damn heavy.
Yeah.
When you go from the Steam Deck to your Switch, like, whew.
Yeah, it's like
But yeah.
I remember, like I said, right, like last year was the least time I had spent on my Switch, and I was playing a lot on Steam Deck. And then
Mm,
in the back half of the year, I kind of like made the Switch, no pun intended, back as Metroid came out, and then there
yeah.
was new stuff going into this year that I was excited to play, and now I've been spending a lot of time on my Switch again, and
Mm,
going back and forth between them as much as I have is
yeah.
like, oof, like it's got to be a third of the weight, right? And
Yeah. It's the least portable, but hey, it's still portable. Yeah.
yeah, and it's
The
funny
Steam
though,
Deck.
because like it also does have like I guess a slight ergonomic advantage as well. Like the grip
This is
on the
true.
Steam Deck is really
Yeah.
nice, whereas I've seen a lot of folks like Steve always talks about his tiny hands, and he
Mm,
struggles a little bit with the Switch because
yeah.
it's just it doesn't have that support for your palm.
You need a
Um,
massive novelty controller, like one of this
yeah, you get one
GameCube
of those Nixies.
Joy-Cons thing. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's interesting. I would love to understand like how much that has influenced the enthusiast market, even for the people that maybe don't own a Steam Deck but are just
Mm,
aware of it and aware that it can do things like play Spider-Man or Elden Ring or these other
yeah.
more
And
triple A
I think it
experiences.
I think it is that kind of basic level of understanding of you don't need to know the technicalities behind the console. All you see is that's a small handheld, that's a small handheld. How come that one can do this? And that's it. And that's the conversation. So yeah.
So when it comes, to wind it back a little bit, to like earlier in the survey, uh, something I guess that also kind of ties back into this, right, is that you always start things off with the section about the people who respond to the survey that do not own a Switch, which I think are
Yeah.
probably the most interesting people in the world. Um, but you had 1.6 of respondents said that they didn't own a Switch, right?
Yeah, it's
And
tiny. Makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you said that in years prior, the
Mm,
rationale has almost always been, oh, there'll be a price drop eventually. I'll
yeah.
pick it up when it's a little cheaper, and I'll get into the backlog at that point. Whereas
Mm,
this year, you said that it seemed like that started to shift more and more to people talking about it
yeah.
being aging hardware and being like,
Yeah.
not only is there like performance issues, right? Of, oh, if I want to get into these new games, am I going to have performance problems? Is this going to feel like an old
Yeah.
console? But also a lot of people being like, I mean, how long until the next one, right? Am I going to buy a
Yeah.
Switch now, 6 years
Yeah.
into its life cycle, when another one's
Exactly.
got to
Yeah.
be imminent, right?
It does feel like the fear around there being something new just around the corner has really ramped up. Because yeah, the past 2 years, that price kind of factor has slowly been eroding, not eroding, but kind of falling to the wayside to kind of this hardware thing, which I say in the report here is kind of a two-pronged kind of concern around, like you just said, like, you know, new hardware being probably imminent or maybe imminent, and the fact that performance is a concern as well. Um, The performance thing, I mean, I can take it or leave it in terms of whether I think that's actually a big concern in people's minds, but
Yeah.
I do think the kind of new hardware stuff is probably a more legitimate kind of consumer kind of fear, I guess, around whether that's actually going to happen or not. Because like we've been talking about Switch Pro for the longest time, and it's not going to happen. But yeah, we're at that kind of apex now, aren't we? As to where we're going to start once Tears of the Kingdom's out, once Pikmin's out. 2024 is what's next time. I mean, it has to be, right? So,
You would imagine, right?
yeah.
But I think that's been a thing that we've talked about on this show a lot in
Mm,
recent memory, and I think seeing it in hard numbers here is so interesting to
mm,
me. Where there's clearly a really big issue, I think, for Nintendo, which is the dichotomy between what their the hardest of the hardcore of their base want and what
yeah,
everyone else wants, and them
yeah,
being, I think, arguably the only big video game publisher that operates that way, right? Where like, the very casual player or, the young kids or the families with multiple Switches, right? Like those are a big segment of their market, and those people are still buying Switches and they're still happy
yeah,
playing Mario Kart 8 on a launch Switch,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I don't know how they navigate that in a way that's
Well, I think
elegant.
that's probably the story. If they want to say they want to have a 10-year life cycle, that takes us up to 2027, which it sounds crazy, but that's another 4 years. What does those 4 years look like? Well, I think the kind of thing here is that those 4 years aren't for us. They're for the 8-year-olds when it gets a price cut and they can get one for their birthday or for Christmas, and there's a massive library of Mario games that they can just dip into straight away.
Sure.
Um, that's who it's for at that point. It's like, will there be something else to kind of satisfy the needs of people who are the hardcore and want the hot new thing? Maybe, but in terms, I can see the Switch being around until 2027.
Yeah.
Whether it's the only thing they sell, that's another conversation. But
That's I think the
that's where
interesting
we're at.
wrinkle, right? Is do we
Yeah,
see kind of that? It's the same thing they did with the Game Boy Advance, same thing they did with the 3DS, right? Where it's like, no,
yeah,
it's the family. It's still around. We're going to
yeah,
support it for more years. There will be exclusive software. There'll be new software. Maybe not exclusive with this because you'd like to think it's going to
mm,
be more of a straight line, but
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's tricky. Like, is it a case of like, physical stuff goes on the new console, you can still get stuff digitally on the old console in terms of like not all the releases, but like third parties and indies can still release stuff on the old. It's tricky to know, isn't it, how they kind of navigate it? But um, there's got to be a split sometime, and I think it's coming sooner rather than later for sure.
Something I also thought was interesting about this segment of the audience, right, was them having price be the primary concern, up
Mm,
until now. And again, jumping ahead, right, when you get to kind of the future thing, you ask the question of how important is backwards compatibility and what price are
yeah,
you hoping for the next machine? And
yeah,
for price, you said that most folks said they'd be willing to spend around 350 and 450 in US
yeah,
dollars at launch. 350 obviously is in line with what the original Switch costs.
yep,
450 seems, maybe arguably more likely if it is going to be significantly more powerful.
yep.
Inflation, all that. Who's to say? But I did think it was interesting that folks have been like, I'm holding out for the price cut, and it's like, oh,
Yeah,
you waited a whole generation. You gonna wait halfway
yeah,
through this one now
exactly.
too, or what?
Yeah, it's daft. It doesn't make a ton of sense. But yeah, in terms of like where the price lands for what's next, and the fact that everyone wants it to be backwards compatibility wise, that I mean, I hate to imagine what that looks like if it isn't.
I mean, I have no
I-
idea. Like,
Yeah.
you gotta hope that they're on that same page at this point
Mm,
because they've talked about how they see the importance of carrying one user base over to the next machine, and that
yeah.
seems to be the easiest way, right? Like, I
It's
mean,
just that they're kind of beholden then, aren't they, to the kind of the chip journey that they're on in terms of the chip manufacturers and who they kind of partner
yeah,
with and
and
stuff like that. So
unless they can come up with like an emulation solution that works well,
yeah,
right? Because it's like
yeah,
you've seen that with obviously like every Sony console has been
mm,
backwards compatible, right? The
yeah,
Xbox
to some degree,
Series X can
yeah.
play if you have a launch Xbox game that you bought, you
Yeah,
can play it
for
on
the
that
most
thing,
part, it does kind of feel like a solved problem. That's for sure. Yeah.
And I feel like
Um,
Nintendo feels like kind of the holdout, right? Where like, at least
mm,
with the
that's fair.
3DS or the Game Boy Advance, like you were able to play your old games on the new hardware, but like home consoles, it's
Yeah.
pretty much, with the exception of the Wii and the Wii U,
Mm,
it's almost always been just a hard cut. And
yeah, that's true.
I don't think
Yeah.
people will be willing to stomach that. I mean, look at, in your survey, you have a chart here, right, where there's 2,323 respondents, 1,735 of them said that it was extremely important for backwards
Extremely
compatibility.
important. Yeah.
For somewhat important, right, is 46, not very important, 40. There's almost no one who thinks it's not an issue. So you gotta hope that they're aware of that as, a need. And
yeah, and I think what makes it different is the fact that this is the first hybrid machine they've done. Like you've just kind of said, like the home consoles have always been a bit kind of hit and miss in terms of the backwards compatibility, or not at all. But the handhelds have always had that element of it, mainly because they've included kind of both hardware in the box. Like there was a Game Boy inside of the DS or whatever. But the fact this is a hybrid kind of makes it feel a little bit different in terms of how they kind of have to approach it. So I don't know, but yeah, extremely important, and it is. It is. I mean, because how many people have sunk hundreds, thousands of pounds into their eShop and all these digital games?
Like you said, average 65. That's a lot of games. I don't want to leave those behind,
Exactly.
And again, it's like, am I really going to go through this process of Nintendo being the only platform where every game I buy, I have to buy again the next generation? Because then at that point...
Yeah, and it just feels kind of wild that we're even having this conversation at this point.
Yeah, that has to be a concern.
This digital library thing has been a concept for the best part of 20 years when like Apple started selling songs on iTunes. It's not a novel concept. So I've still got songs in my iTunes library from 2004 or whatever it was. It's not a new idea. So the fact that we're still talking about this in 2023 is kind of wild. I mean, how long Steam been around for? It's just insane. 15 years, 20.
I think you're right. And I think it's a bad look. And it's like, for me, as somebody who was already, prior to the Steam Deck, right? The goal for any indie title for me was I want to play it on the Switch, right? If it runs on Switch, that's where I want to play it. If next gen rolls around and I don't have my library come over to the next, I'll never buy an indie game on Switch again or a Nintendo console again. Forget it.
It's Steam Deck all the way, baby.
Yeah. It's like, or even so, or Xbox or somewhere where I'm going to be able to own it and carry it with me, Yeah. I'd rather have it on a handheld, but.
Such a wild, sour taste in the mouth if they did that. So let's just hope they don't.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think seeing that attitude be so pervasive through so many of the different questions is like really an interesting one, and I think it speaks to like what a Herculean task they have ahead of them of making everyone in the Switch, audience feel satisfied. And
they've had such a hit on their hands with this thing, and it's like the second album syndrome is real for this whatever they do next. So yeah,
I mean, especially
good luck,
especially when you think about like how disastrous the Wii DS to the Wii U 3DS transition was for them. It was like almost a death blow, and that's an exaggeration, but the closest they've been.
I mean, there is a reason they went into mobile games. The Wii U spooked them good. So yeah,
and you got to hope that whatever the path forward is, that like they're acutely aware of how people feel about this stuff.
I think the kind of fear that we all have around this is that like it's weird, but everyone's like, don't be too Nintendo about it, because like they're like, please just play it safe and be really boring and make a Switch 2.
Yeah, really.
But that's not what anyone's expecting from them, which is why there's this weird kind of fear about it all. So
and it's like that's exactly what I want. And I like if it was up to me, that would be the decision. Is like, forget it. Like let's not ever like, this is it. This is it. We do Switch now. That's our console, and people will still buy the Switch 5 if we make it awesome, right? Like look at the PlayStation. I think a huge part of PlayStation's strength as a brand, and why even though the fact that like by and large they and Xbox have a pretty uniform product, right? Like I think a big part of PlayStation's like strength is that like it's easy, right? Like it's easy to 5 is a higher number than 4, so it's better. Got it. I'm in. There's a reason that people do that.
Numbering.
Right. Yeah. It's like, come on, you tell me like you send you're a kid and you're like, I want an Xbox, and parents go out to the store and they're like, get an Xbox. They're gonna, which one are they gonna get? The Series S, the Series X? Do they know? Like, and granted, that problem gets, I think, less and less every generation as gamers are parents now.
These companies aren't helping themselves, are they?
No, it's like, why even create the problem?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
It's a weird thing. I mean, I get why the Xbox kind of dug themselves a hole from going from the Xbox to the Xbox 360, and then they're kind of on that weird path where they've fucked the numbering up. So
Yeah.
yeah, I get it. So, optics, but hey, make a Switch 2.
Please. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I swear to God, if Nintendo came out and they're like, okay, we're ready to reveal the successor to the Switch, it's called Switch 2, it has a 1080p screen, it's docked 4K, and it's
Mm.
locked 60 FPS on every. I'd be like, great, that's
And
literally,
all your games work.
that's
That's
it.
it.
That's
That's all
all
I
I
need.
care about. Great.
But it still comes with 32 gigs of onboard memory. Storage,
Fine.
sorry. Yeah.
Fine. I'll
Yeah,
take it.
whatever.
I'll take the L.
Yeah.
I'll take the one
Yeah.
dumb Nintendo
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah. Can't
So
believe there was an 8 gig Wii U. That was crazy. But yeah, sorry.
that
Go on.
what a
Yeah.
choice. What a choice
Yeah.
that was. I had one
Yeah.
friend that was unlucky enough to get stuck with one of those, and they were just like, I hate this thing. I hate it
But you
so
can't put
much.
any games on it. Nope. Such a cheap move. Anyway. Yeah.
So one of the other things I always think is really interesting is the breakdown of how people play their Switch, and like what
Mm.
what is the most predominant way it's used. Because
Yeah. This always surprises me personally. But
yeah, it's like pretty consistently it's been TV mode is dominant, and
yeah.
that seems so strange to me because I of all the people I know who are hardcore Switch players, I only know one person where that's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hybrid, sure, but I feel like most people tend, at least again, anecdotally in my experience, seem to lean more towards handheld. So I'm
Yeah.
so surprised to see that, especially.
And it is consistent, like year on year. Like TV mode, it's not by a massive margin, but TV mode always edges out handheld play. I think this year it was like 52%.
It's
TV
52 to
mode.
42. Yeah, so it's
Right.
like,
Okay.
10%
Yeah.
spread. Not a huge number, but still.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah. And then you got a few percent weirdos that like tabletop modes, but we won't talk about that.
1.29%. I was like, what kind of sick person is doing this? This is the
Yeah,
primary way you play?
Exactly. Last year it was a little bit higher as well. I think that was mainly maybe because the OLED had finally had a good kickstart and people were like, hey, let's give this a go. I don't
That's
know.
true.
But anyway, yeah, TV mode always wins out. And like I say, it's always surprised me because like me primarily, I'm like 90% handheld play on my Switch.
Same. Yeah.
I never dock this thing. But
Unless I'm playing like a multiplayer game with other people, it's very, very rare.
Just to get a bit of insight into that, because it's always been so consistent. This year I asked a new question, which was basically, do you ever take your Switch out of your house? And like most people don't, which kind of aligns with the TV mode thing. But,
Shocked by that. I was shocked by that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
I had the breakdown here. Yeah, it was like it's just such an insanely small number.
Yeah, it's like 64% said they never or rarely take their Switch out of the house. So yeah.
Which is, I can't imagine that because it's like
I took my Switch out yesterday and played it outside. So
yeah, it's like I often do that, and
Yeah.
whether it's, and I mean, I guess like I could see people maybe interpreting outside differently. Like, are you literally outside your home?
I wasn't. I was just outside of my home. Yeah, I mean, I played it in the coffee shop, but yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
Yeah.
I would say that's a not insignificant percentage of when I play it. It's like
No.
I often take it with me on the road if I'm traveling, if I'm on a plane, anything like that. Obviously, I'm racking up, I'd say at least probably 10% of my hours of the year, 20% of my hours of the year when I'm out.
Yep, and that's why being a hybrid is so important, because 52% may want to play it on their TV, but the fact that it is so close, it's kind of like 50-50 kind of split. I mean, yeah, TV mode wins out, but it's important that they keep this kind of hybrid concept for whatever's next, I think, because
Yeah.
it's people love it. I love the fact that I don't have to be docked to television.
I feel like that would be more devastating to me than the lack of backwards compatibility. If they were like, no,
Right.
yeah, like it's not a hybrid thing anymore. I'd be like, what are you kidding
Yeah.
me? Like you guys, you nailed it.
That's your thing now. That's who you are. Yeah,
It should be anyway.
But-
Jesus, right? Like
nobody paints Nintendo into a corner. This is the
that's
thing.
very true.
Yeah.
It's just so insane because when you think about like, there was that move, I guess, it was like a year and change before the Switch launched, where they made that kind of announcement that they were going to be bringing all of their development studios in house and sharing more resources and not like thinking of things as two separate types of products anymore. I cannot imagine them wanting to go back to that, to have two different, pieces of hardware you need to have full libraries for.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, not in any kind of deep sense, but earlier on, like how they made that kind of proclamation that they're going to split. They're not going to have the kind of split between hardware divisions and like handheld and home console groups for working on different games, and how they can bring them all together, and therefore there'll be more kind of output. Do you think there has been like more output from them? It's hard to say. I couldn't really land
So
anywhere on it because like you'd think by them not having this split between handheld and home console, their output would have been more than it has been. And I don't know if I don't know
so
where I landed on that.
I think it's an interesting question. It's one that like if
Mm,
I was going to give a firm answer to, I definitely want to do a little bit more like research and
bit of
have
homework.
have
Sure.
yeah, have the data to really speak to it. But like
Mm,
anecdotally, I would say it seems like yes, because
mm,
and whether or not this was true, my perception during the Wii U and 3DS era was like I felt like the 3DS always had something coming out to
yeah.
play, and the Wii
Yeah.
U it was
Yeah.
like, what? Where are the games? Right? Like, where is
Yeah.
anything?
Yeah. They
And
had their favorite for sure.
and I feel like when it comes to the Switch, I don't know if like by volume they're necessarily putting out more games than they were across those two SKUs,
Mm,
but it
mm,
feels to me like the Switch has always had, and even years that other people have called soft, there's always been at least two, three big meaty
yeah.
games that are like sizable,
Yeah.
AAA experiences. And I think a lot of the like quote unquote handheld games that we used to get have grown in scope. Like Pokemon obviously is like a bigger
Mm,
production now that it's, like the
yeah.
latest is a 3D, open world game
Yeah.
versus
Still wish they'd take a bit more time on this game. But
yeah,
hey,
you're
yeah.
preaching to the choir on that
Yeah.
one, my friend. But I think it speaks to whether or not like the volume has increased. I think they've grown the types of products that come out. So games that maybe
Yeah.
we used to get and kind of take for granted as like these smaller, more bite-sized. Like there was probably a lot more Kirby releases on the 3DS, right? If you go and total
Yeah.
them up. But I think the
Right.
games we get now feel like Forgotten Land felt like a more substantial effort
Yeah.
than like Star Allies, right?
Yes. Yes. They've amped it up a notch for sure. Yeah.
And I think you look at like Fire Emblem, right? There were what, 3 sets of
There's
Fire
been
Emblem games on 3DS, and we've
there's
gotten
been a yeah.
one and a half here, right? Kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's it probably isn't more raw releases, but I guess the
In
argument is
terms of the
like,
kind of style of them and the approach they've taken for them, and they've been a bit more ambitious with the releases. Yeah.
and I think some titles that we used to think of as being more niche now have a bit more prestige,
Yeah.
because they've gotten
Mm.
that bump. Like Kirby feels like Forgotten Land feels like the most significant Kirby release in a really long time,
Oh,
and
for sure.
you know,
Yeah. Like in a long time.
and I know
Yeah.
you
I
had
mean,
it on the list for games as one of the most played games in terms of hours. Like Three Houses was like, for an
yeah.
already pretty popular franchise, brought in a ton of new people, myself included.
Yes. Yeah. That's actually an interesting point, actually, because what did I say here? Yes. The kind of I ask every year, like, what game have you spent the most time with on your Switch? Like across the entire time that you've owned your Switch. Obviously, for some people that'll be like a few years. Some people it'll be the whole 6 years. Obviously, Breath of the Wild has remained top throughout the whole time we've been doing this survey. Animal Crossing makes sense. Game of the pandemic, people sunk a ton of time into that game.
Yeah,
It demands a
absolutely.
lot of time, so it makes sense. Smash Bros, fair enough. Fire Emblem Three Houses was number 4 in terms of the top 5 kind of games that people spent the most time with. And this year, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe took the 5th spot. Um, and it's interesting because like Three Houses was in the mix last year, but Splatoon 2 was as well. This year, it seems to me like the Splatoon player base has been kind of split between Splatoon 2 and Splatoon 3. So Splatoon has kind of fallen out of that top
I
5.
feel like
And
Splatoon 3 also did not live up to the hype. Like it felt like it
yeah,
kind of hit with a thud, whereas
yeah. And then
2
that
was
DLC
such a
where it was
movement.
like that DLC for Splatoon where it was just like, oh, here's somewhere else to hang out. It's another lobby. It's like, that's not DLC. Anyway, but
And
Mario
also
Kart
not
Deluxe.
included in the expansion pack for whatever reason. It's just like,
Yeah.
what is the
Bizarre choices.
methodology here, right? Like it's like
Yeah,
how do I know what you're going to be doing? And the answer is I don't. And
you don't. There's a dartboard at Nintendo and we'll just see where it lands. Yeah. Um,
I think with Splatoon 3 too, right? Like I feel like Splatoon 2 came out and everybody had like heard about how cool Splatoon was. The Switch was new and
yeah.
hot. You wanted things to play. I feel
Yeah.
like with Splatoon 3, it's like, I mean, the Splatoon crowd was still playing Splatoon 2, and 3 does not feel like a significant upgrade. It feels like a lot more of the same. And
Yeah.
it's a full-priced game. It doesn't have any like real significant plans for long-term support or a season
Mm,
pass or any of the things that I think people have come to expect when you're talking about a games as a service. Like, they want dailies, they want weeklies, they want a reason to keep checking in aside from putting stickers in
the
a locker.
occasional Splatfest. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's like, come on, you know?
There's not enough. Yeah, for sure.
I was surprised to see that on this list because I figured that maybe at least the core audience was still, you know, yeah, maybe I wasn't super into Splatoon 3, but the Splatoon people, but like, I don't even know that they were. Like, it feels like
it does seem to have fallen off pretty hard, hasn't it? Pretty quickly, yeah, for sure. But yeah, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was the other one that kind of rounded out the top 5 of like most played games on the Switch in terms of like time people play them. And I guess a lot of that is down to the DLC that's been trickling out over the past whatever 12 months it's been. I don't know. But yeah, that, I mean, I say in thing here, that game is kind of insane in terms of its staying power. That game came out in 2014 on the Wii U. It's nearly 10 years old.
It's wild.
And we're still getting DLC. It's just, like I say, it reminds me of like GTA 5 and like Minecraft in terms of its legs, you know?
Yeah.
And it just keeps selling insane numbers. And like, it's getting updates, which no one saw coming. It's a good game.
It really is. Yeah. It's crazy too, because like, you mentioned earlier the lever that they have to pull with like the price cut. I feel that way about Mario Kart 9 when they're like, oh yeah, Mario Kart 9's coming out on the Switch too. You'd be like, yeah, okay, great, cha-ching, like the next most popular game of all time.
Yeah, they could even pull that lever with the Switch now and just be like, oh, we're not making a price cut, but you buy it, you get Mario Kart. It's like, you know, there's so many different ways they could do it. So yeah, but yeah, that question around playtime was kind of across the entire time that people have owned their Switch. I also then asked them, like, what game do you feel that you've played the most during the last year? And this kind of gives a more kind of up-to-date take on what's kind of popping with the Switch kind of audience, I guess. I'll run through the top 5 for you quickly. Like, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was number 1.
Makes sense.
No surprise, because it's a long game. Big campaign. Number 2 is Pokemon Legends Arceus, and kind of surprised me on that one, but that's just because I fell off that so hard, so damn fast. It did not resonate with me at all.
It's so funny, like how polarizing that game is. I feel like because I was one of the people on the total other side of that, of like, oh, this is like my favorite Pokemon game in I don't even know how long. And it felt like such a breath of fresh air. And like you are certainly not alone with the whole like but it didn't click for me the way I wanted it to.
Yeah.
And
it did feel like a breath of fresh air, but the air was a bit stale. I don't know. That doesn't make that analogy makes zero fucking sense. But yeah. Anyway, but yeah, and then we had Splatoon 3, which kind of then Zelda and Breath of the Wild and Mario Kart. So yeah, it's interesting all the same.
It's insane that 2 of the Switch's launch title are still just like so. They just loom so ever presently in everyone's mind. You know, of like. Jesus.
Yeah, the fact that Zelda's like in the last year's kind of like most played games is kind of crazy.
And you got to imagine it's a lot of people who are like, I want to play it one more time before Tears of the Kingdom, you know?
Yeah, I mean, who hasn't thought that? I mean, I was tempted to, but then I was like, no, I don't have that much time spare. But hey,
and I kept like being like, well, I want to play it, but like I think it's coming out, and I've been doing that for like 2 years, where I'm like, I could have just played it, you know? But like at this point, it's like, well, what am I gonna do? You know, I don't want to burn myself out on it before the new one comes out, you know?
Yeah, it's that version of Hyrule is enduring and like so compelling, and like that launch title is just gonna. I mean, it's a Wii U game, which is insane to think about, but that's just gonna go down, isn't it? It's like one of the best launch titles of all time. So
yeah, I mean, I think I think if you ask the question, what is the best launch title of all time, I have to imagine that 9 out of 10.
It's definitely in contention, isn't it?
Like, come on, you know? How often is a launch title one of the best games on a platform? Very rarely.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? Maybe like
usually you get like some tech demos and like one banger,
Yeah, and it's like, I guess Nintendo's a bit of an exception there, considering several have launched with a absolute banger of a Mario title, but like still, you know? Like
Super Mario 64, greatest game of all time.
Sure. And, pretty cool for it to be Zelda, because obviously Zelda always been, a big hitter for them. But I mean, this, like, sales-wise is,
Yeah, it's like 30 million, something like that. Yeah.
Gotta love that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was very pleased to see when you had the section about, like, which of the following Nintendo-published titles that you own, and it was, like, the stuff from 2022 to 2023.
Yeah, like past 18 months, yeah.
Yeah, very, very pleased to see the again, we were talking about the Arceus thing. Like,
Hmm.
that being the number one by such a wide
Yeah.
margin, I was like, yes, good. Like, please. Like, I would love to see another one of those, or at least for them to
Yeah.
see, like, hey, like, people responded to it being different and something else. Like,
Yeah.
let's play a little bit more with that. But
Yeah, I hope they do lean into the fact that, oh, look, Pokemon, but different. Do more of that because that's
it works.
I don't. Yeah, it may not have resonated with me, but I love the fact that they tried something different after 25 years.
Yes.
So yeah.
Very,
In
very
terms of like
cool.
other games, sorry, go ahead.
No, I bet you I'm driving to the same thing. I
Well,
thought that Metroid Prime Remastered being
yeah,
so
that's
high
what.
was, oh my gosh, insane.
Yeah, it's insane because like Metro Prime Remastered came out like 2 weeks before this survey launched, and it was the third highest response. Sorry, in terms of which games people have picked up. So again, I know this is an enthusiast crowd, but damn, people went to that game,
It,
myself included.
it's one of those
Yeah.
things too where it's like I remember they had to do like they had like a kind of a smaller printing and they did a second printing because
Mm,
it was like outselling Hogwarts Legacy and all these other like new
yeah.
games on Amazon and it's like fuck yeah like that's awesome.
It's weird, isn't it? It kind of speaks to like, were they like, unsure about it? I don't know. It's interesting, but it's a hit.
It's so funny though because I think it speaks to what we're talking about with like the Switch being such a status raiser for certain Nintendo
Mm,
IP because like
yeah.
Metroid is such an interesting case in it being I think iconography wise one of the most
Mm,
recognizable and influential series, but it's never been a
yeah.
seller. Like
No,
it's
I mean, I
never.
don't know if this is still true, but for the longest time, I used to love saying that the Nintendo series have sold more than all of the Metroid franchise games combined, and that was true. I don't know if it still is, but that just goes to show, like, yeah, Metroid was not a seller.
No,
That's probably not the case now, but
but
thanks for the Switch. But
yeah, I mean
still,
that's right. Like, and
that's your
who's to
point. Yeah.
say, right? Like, is it because Metroid Dread was so hot? Is it because Metroidvanias have become a huge genre in the last couple of years, and now you
Mm,
have folks who maybe have never played Metroid but loved Hollow Knight or Ori or any of these other
yeah,
games.
and there's that kind of halo effect. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
and they want to go back and like get the roots of it now and see
Mm,
that this game that is 20 plus years old is like wow, this is still incredible. Like this
yeah.
game absolutely holds up.
Yeah, it really does. Like, it got so much right, and like, it was clearly ahead of its time.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it makes me really excited to see what the legs are going to be like for Prime 4 because obviously Dread was
Yeah.
the best selling game in the franchise. I think it
Hmm.
outsold like you said it was one of those like oh yeah it's outsold the last 5 combined. Cool, like it
Yeah.
clearly a
Yeah.
hit, but Prime 4 I feel like is looking at this that could be a top 5 seller as one of the last games that come out. That's insane.
Yeah.
I'd love to see it, like you said, as a cross-platform. That would be a really fun one to launch a new
Yeah.
console on, and
You can play it in 4K on your Switch 2. Yeah.
like
There's your hook.
that would be
There's your
so
hook. Yeah.
cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I would
Yeah.
love to see them put that kind of faith on Metroid too. Of like,
Mm.
yeah, that's a launch
Yeah.
title. Yeah, that'll hit.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, you'll buy it.
they kind of did that with
Yeah.
the OLED with Dread. Like that was the game they were
That's
pushing
true.
with it, and
It worked.
yeah, and I think that's still probably the best looking game on the OLED.
Right.
Really takes advantage of it. So another one of the ones that is like a common stat is the whole digital physical split when it comes to
Mm.
software, and it was interesting to see that it was a little like digital was a little bit higher this year
Mhm.
than it had been previously, but
Yeah.
like that split still seems to be pretty consistent.
It's pretty consistent. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, I guess it speaks to the enthusiast crowd responding to this as well. I think generally is a
Definitely.
more
Yeah.
physical crowd than digital, but I'm
Mhm.
kind of surprised that the last couple of years haven't changed people's habits in that regard a little bit more. Like
Kind of like pandemic stuff. Yeah.
yeah, like that definitely kind of was the
Mm.
nail in the coffin for me of buying physical games anymore because it was like the
Right. Okay.
only real reason I would still buy a physical game was like so I could loan it out, and it's like, well, I
Yeah.
can't see anybody anyway, right? So
To be honest, the only really reason that I buy physical still is because you can get them cheaper, which is insane.
yeah.
But like,
And that
if
doesn't
a
happen
store's
in the
doing
States. Like that's the thing
right.
I learned from working with Steve is like that's a really
Okay.
awesome thing that you guys can. It's usually about 10 pounds cheaper, right?
Well, I hadn't pre-ordered Tears of the Kingdom, but that final trailer, I was like, okay, I need to go pre-order this game immediately.
Absolutely.
But there was a retailer offering £15 off of it. So it's like, okay, straight away. I got
Yeah,
it for £44 instead of 60. So
that's awesome.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, and that's
Um,
already cheaper than the 70 it would be if you got it digitally, right? So
exactly. So that's why I go physical and stuff. It's just so I get why, but yeah, you would think generally, yeah, over time, especially like if the sales kind of thing isn't on physical isn't a thing in the States or whatever, that digital would be pushing it up, and it is. It's 55-45 in favor of digital games, but yeah, Switch enthusiasts clearly still like having a physical game in their hands to some degree.
yeah, yeah, you have to wonder like how much longer that's gonna track
Mm,
too.
mm,
Of like it seems more and more like we're moving away from that, right? Like collector's editions don't come with physical games anymore. There's going to be
yeah.
they're getting the disc add-on for the PS5 is about to become an attachment, right? Like it feels more and
Oh,
more
okay.
that we're,
Right.
you know, I wonder what that looks like next generation and like how,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah, it feels like we've had the toe in the water for so long now. It's like you just got to get in the bath sometimes, and just yeah, that's it. Um,
yeah,
be interesting how they navigate that because I mean, even like now, you go into stores and you see these like I don't know how to say it. Is it folksicle? Anyway, it's cards in a box with a code on it. It's like, why
right.
am I buying a plastic box with a code in it? It's incredibly wasteful for one, but um, yeah, it's weird.
And it's like so many games don't even like have the full game on the disc anymore. So the whole like, oh,
Hmm.
preservation or whatever, like it doesn't even fulfill that
Makes
anymore,
sense.
you know?
Yeah, like the GTA trilogy. I think it was just one of the games on the cart on the Switch, which is yeah, just that's just Rockstar being cheap and not buying the big Switch cartridge. But hey,
Right.
yeah,
Got to work on
they could
those
have made a bit.
margins.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've got a little bit more to talk about here in a second, but let me remind you that this episode of Nintendo Noise is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of April. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Earth Visitor, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, a.k.a. Sobe, Snackago, Ty the Dude, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. You're all the reals to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. If you want to write into the show, suggest a topic, send in some questions for, just like people did for Chris this week. Of course, there are a bunch of ways you can get in touch, and all of them can be found over at flipscreen.games. That's our website where you can find our Discord, our email address, however you choose to get in touch or get involved with the show. We thank you for tuning into another episode of Nintendo Noise. So, I want to talk about the question you asked about Nintendo's focus moving forward. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
like forward thinking questions there, which seems to kind of be the theme this year, right? People feel like they're
Hmm.
ready for the next thing. And
Yeah, definitely.
this question is such an interesting one. I think it speaks to the strength of Nintendo's IP that you asked if they had to choose a focus moving forward. Would you rather see them revive old series or focus on new IP? And
Yeah.
pretty evenly split. 2020 was like the biggest outlier of the last couple years, where it was like a
Hmm.
far more significant desire for new content. But we're back
Right.
to like a 52-48 split this year around, and it's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's I've always kind of been quite pleased at that result in a way because the fact that it's always very even, but always kind of generally been slightly in skew of new stuff, only by a couple of percentage points. But the fact that it's always been that kind of small margin between like, I'll do something new, do something new. Um, I think it's kind of a healthy mix between like, you've got this great legacy and they've got so many great legacy franchises that they can lean on. It's insane in terms of, the IP that they're kind of sitting on. But the fact that people generally also want them to experiment and do new things, like, I mean, in years prior, I've said, would you like them to do new IP like Splatoon? And then I realized Splatoon's been around for like a decade, dude. I can't really say that anymore. um, so trying to think of like a new IP from Nintendo is proving a bit more difficult. But yeah,
And that's the thing, right? Is I feel like all their efforts this generation, like obviously
mm,
Arms was an at bat that didn't play out. But
no,
then a lot of the other stuff that they've done, it's been small stuff. It's been indie stuff. It hasn't
mm,
been a new, proper AAA
yeah,
franchise. It's been a while since we've seen something like that.
yeah. I don't know if that's just them kind of playing it safe because they had a hit on their hands in terms of like, there's 100 million of these things. Let's just do what we know. So I don't know. It's one of those things that they've had so many kind of wins with it. So
So, in terms of the actual franchises that folks did call out as wanting to get their hands on, it was I think like a fairly predictable list, right?
Hmm.
Top response F-Zero was also the top
Yep.
response last year. I think surprising nobody. Star Fox number 2, Kid Icarus number
Yep.
3, Golden Sun was number
Mhm.
4, and then Donkey Kong was a new number 5, which I thought
Yeah.
was pretty cool.
And the Donkey Kong thing, I think a lot of that is there was a lot of rumors in the past kind of 6, 12 months around there being maybe Donkey Kong stuff in the works at Retro or even in-house
Yeah, and they was
internally at
that.
Nintendo.
Yeah, EAD had like a new Donkey Kong team, and they were gonna make like a more
Yeah.
Donkey Kong 64 style experience
Yeah, and then there's the whole kind of thing with the Donkey Kong expansion at the theme park
in the
and the fact that Donkey
movie.
Kong's in the movie. So Donkey Kong's kind of in the mind. So I think that's probably why he's here. Yes, we've had a Donkey Kong game on the Switch, but it was a Wii U port, so it makes sense. Um, Kid Icarus and Golden Sun always kind of surprised me. I think again that just maybe just leaning into the enthusiast crowd of like, the more kind of I don't know what the right phrase for that is, but they
Well,
seem like more niche picks.
uh, and you took the words right out of Wakahula's mouth. One of our Patreon producers just said, "Hot take: F-Zero, Star Fox, and Kid Icarus are very niche, never sold very well, and don't need new entries on the Switch." How dare you say that about Star Fox, Wakahula? Okay.
How dare you say that about F-Zero?
All right, look, I'll get behind you on F-Zero, Chris. I love F-Zero on the Super Nintendo. It's the only one I've ever
Yeah.
played. If they want to
Okay.
give me a new one, I'm in. But I
Yeah.
feel like Star Fox as an IP, I totally hear the criticism that most of the games are just chasing 64 or the original or whatever, but like, I feel like that IP has so much juice in terms of like, there's all this lore and all these
Yeah.
characters, and it's got a great style, and I would love to see them try something that was more akin to adventures, but then also just had some on rail, spaceship fights, right? Like,
Yeah, I just think they've got like this. It's this sci-fi universe that probably can figure something out. I mean, it's like there's so much fun stuff you could do there. And the same is with like F-Zero. I mean, the longest thing I remember is like I don't know if it was Miyamoto or somebody else at Nintendo basically saying, "Oh, we don't know what to do with F-Zero because it's just going to be a rehash of the old thing," which is like sometimes that's okay.
yeah,
You've
especially like
made
just do it on a
10, you've
budget.
made 10 Mario Party games. It's like I don't
Yeah,
get it. It's
yeah.
like, yeah,
It's
I
like,
get that they want to be creative, but then why make 10 Mario Party games if that's your attitude? I don't get it. It
yeah,
doesn't make
and
sense.
yeah, and I mean, I guess if it sold better, that would be more of an incentive, I guess, to keep going
Yeah,
back to the well. But
that's fair. But what's stopping you, just give me F-Zero GX with HD with online play. We'd be sorted. That's all you need to do.
and it's also like,
Um,
I feel like it's so unfair to judge old franchises based on how they sold in a pre-Switch world. Because, like, there are
yeah,
a lot of franchises that historically have not sold that well, like Metroid, that are now selling
yeah,
well. So, like, who's to say if a good Star Fox game came out that it wouldn't sell?
yeah,
If a good F-Zero game came out, that it wouldn't sell. But
yeah,
you know what?
exactly.
I,
So
I get where you're coming from, Wakahula. I understand. I understand the feeling of like, hey, let's move forward. Let's get some new stuff. But they got so many IP on the bench that I would just love to see partner with an indie studio and be like, hey, make
yeah,
a new F-Zero, right? Let's spend a
yeah.
fraction of what we would spend to make it in house and see what happens.
Well, that's kind of what happened. Well, I don't know how much it costs, but in terms of them partnering with Sega for F-Zero GX, it was them
Right.
experimenting and letting someone else have a go. So more of that. Yeah.
And that was such a hit.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
funny.
Star Fox Adventures is weird, but
I
yeah.
was just watching a Did You Know Gaming thing not that long ago, and the quote from Miyamoto that you're referencing, I think I remember him being
Yeah.
like, "Could we make a game better than GX? Like, isn't that? I feel like
Yeah.
we did it, right? It's like, then
Yeah.
remaster it, just put it out again,
Yeah. Exactly. If you can do it for Metroid, do it for F-Zero. So,
please.
I don't know.
I'd love that.
Yeah. That game is rock hard though, to be fair. But yeah, fun. Star Fox Adventures, I remember playing a lot of that when it came out on the GameCube. I don't really have the fondest memories of it. I mean, I enjoyed it, but
Sure.
it wasn't a Star Fox game. But yeah. But then again, like Nintendo don't really know what a Star Fox game is other than Star Fox 64. So
Yes,
I don't know.
they
Yeah.
they got to do
Why not
something,
see what works? Yeah,
but yeah.
exactly.
I don't know. I just feel
Um,
like there's so much juice there. It's one of the only Nintendo series that actually has lore and characters that
mm,
are like fleshed out.
yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Another one
The
that
kind of
was.
same
Oh,
question,
yeah, go ahead.
third party stuff, yeah?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I asked the same sort of question. So like, okay, what Nintendo franchises are missing on the Switch? We've just gone through that. What third party franchises are missing on the Switch? And in years prior, we've had like big games like Persona always being in the top kind of 5, like most wanted
Sure.
games. GTA is another one, but like we've had Persona now. So this year I was kind of surprised where the response is here. Metal Gear Solid was the top response. I was kind of surprised by that because like no one's getting Metal Gear Solid anywhere. So I don't know.
Seeing Halo on it, I was like, okay, guys, yeah, dream on, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Metal Gear Solid, Fallout, Yakuza / Like a Dragon, whatever you want to call it, and then Call of Duty and Halo, kind of rounding it out. I think Call of Duty and Halo being there, it just speaks to the fact that first-person shooters on Switch are non-existent and underrepresented. And there's a desire for those experiences on the Switch.
And you had that question of like, what are the genres people are missing? And it was shooters, racers, right? And it's like, well,
yeah, exactly.
So give me F-Zero.
Yeah, exactly. That's why they're there. The one that I think is most likely is maybe like Yakuza or Call of Duty in terms of what I could actually see happening like on the Switch. Call of Duty just because Microsoft want it to happen with the Activision deal, but that's just been given a big blow, so who knows?
I was kind of surprised that they didn't. I always thought that in the way that Skyrim felt like a good match on Switch, I always thought it was kind of weird that they didn't try to bring Fallout 3 or New Vegas to Switch. Like, that would have been such a good fit, and I feel like people would definitely vibe with having those games on the go, even if they weren't up-resed in a significant way, just because they're classics, you know?
Yep. There was kind of other kind of common responses to this. Like one of the most common was like they want to see Elden Ring on the Switch. I'm like, okay, dream on.
Get a Steam Deck, baby.
that ain't happening. The Sims, which again I think is like would be like an easy win for like EA, right? But there's a lot of easy wins that EA haven't taken,
like Mass Effect.
Like Mass Effect. Genshin Impact was another one that came up quite a bit, and Red Dead Redemption, which I don't know, maybe.
That's another one too, where it's just like, are you kidding me? I would even if they didn't change it at all, it was the same exact graphics. I would love to have that on a handheld. It's not on Steam, and you can't play it on Steam Deck. Like, it's so annoying that there are not really any options to do that anywhere.
Yeah, and Rockstar have got like a they've done it before. Like LA Noir's on the Switch, and like the GTA games are on the Switch. What I really want is Rockstar's Table Tennis on the Switch with online play, but hey, I love that game. Anyway, really niche request though. I can appreciate that.
To talk a little bit about the retro side of things, this was another one that I thought was interesting, right? It was like which games you'd most want to see on the service in the future, and a lot of the top answers,
like the Switch Online stuff.
Yeah, right. With Earthbound and GoldenEye being like the two top requests from previous years, and obviously they both came, so. Kind of interesting now to see that everyone's kind of like, it's Pokemon. It's Pokemon. We want Pokemon.
Yeah.
Why are these not on here?
Yeah, a lot of that has been driven around the whole kind of addition of obviously Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games onto the Nintendo Switch Online service. That's the one Game Boy game everyone cares about. Why is it not here? So the fact that that was the top answer this year, specifically like Pokemon Emerald. I mean, Red, Blue, and Yellow were up there, and they were the top responses. But Emerald in particular was kind of an interesting kind of standout as well.
I feel like for the generation of kids that got into Pokemon, like after our generation, that's probably where, it's probably an increased level of nostalgia for them because that's where they started.
But yeah, people want to play these first games and see where it all kind of kicked off, I guess.
Sure.
These games are old now. So
that was so cool when they came to 3DS. I remember being on Twitter at the time and seeing like kids that are like, I'm playing this for the first time. How does this work? And it was just so like, oh wow, like what an experience, right? To be able to see a new generation like go through it with fresh eyes and all the learnings of the future generations,
And I think these games will come. I think a lot of people expected it at Pokemon Day, to be perfectly honest, and it didn't happen. But I do think it will happen. It's just a case of when, not if. In terms of other kind of retro games people want to see come to the Switch Online service, Mother 3, but that's just like a joke at this point.
Yeah.
Super Mario RPG, which I think is a legitimate request. Chrono Trigger, Golden Sun, Diddy Kong Racing, which would be nice. The Zelda Oracle games, which we know are on the way, I believe. So, yeah.
Great lineup. Yeah. And then in terms of like
all of them.
Stuff they'd want to see come, again, unsurprisingly, it's GameCube. GameCube's the next, I think, big bastion that people want.
I don't think it's going to happen, but
Probably not.
I think we're probably kind of done with platforms in terms of additions to NSO, I think.
Yeah, I mean, unless it stays consistent and the Switch 2 has everything we already have and then they continue to add stuff, maybe, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think if they're going to add more platforms now, it's going to be more kind of like obscure stuff like TurboGrafx or Neo Geo or some weird stuff like that, Who knows?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And then just to close things out, two last things I wanted to highlight here is the upcoming game that folks are most excited for, I should say.
Yeah.
Unsurprisingly,
Put your guess in the comments now.
take a
Everyone's
guess.
gonna get it right.
Everybody here, write it down, right? Okay, it's
Yeah,
Legend of
it's a
Zelda
free
Tears
one.
of the Kingdom. There you go.
Yeah.
Big shock. Number 2, Metroid Prime 4. Number 3, Pikmin 4. Advance Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp, which of course is now available, was the next one.
Yep.
Very nice. And then Hollow Knight Silk Song was the last one in
Yeah.
the top 5. Pretty predictable top 5, I think.
Yeah.
You know?
No surprises at all because I don't really know what you'd say beyond that, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, right. You know,
Yeah.
it's like these are the games we know are still coming. So there you go.
Yeah.
That's what we're hyped for.
Yeah, Advance Wars just comes out because it was asked before the game came out. That's why it's there. Yeah. Other kind of ones were Hogwarts Legacy, which is coming to the Switch allegedly.
Yeah, we'll
That
see.
Professor Layton game that got announced, and some other stuff like the Bait and Chaos. Hades 2 is another one. So yeah.
So before we move off of the State of the Switch, I have one last non-State of Switch question for you that will close things out on. Any other thoughts or anything you want to share before we wrap up the data conversation?
I think there was just one thing really, and that was around the Nintendo Switch Online kind of membership as a whole and what the kind of perception is around that. And a lot of people generally seem to think the base kind of tier represents good value for money and people are happy with it. But the expansion pack still kind of hasn't landed in terms of customer satisfaction.
Less
I don't
than
think.
50%. Yeah, it's like 40% or something, right?
Yeah,
Pretty low.
I'm trying to find it now, but yeah, in terms of the optics around the expansion pack, I just don't think they've kind of got the mix right yet. Yeah, of all of the people that I asked, I think like only 48% said they were actually expansion pack members, and then kind of those, in terms of it being good value for money, it was like 40% said yes. So most people said no, it's not good value for money. And I don't know. I don't know. That's Nintendo have added new DLC to the expansion pack. They've added new libraries of games to it, like the GBA, but still, kind of, it hasn't kind of hit. It's not the home run, I guess.
I think the narrative is so mixed, right? Because it's like it feels like it's you're getting more retro games and like random like if it was every piece of DLC, right? I think people would be in on it.
The message would be really clear, yeah.
But the fact that you have to ask every single time, and then like the games that do come, it's like, okay, but like Pokemon's not here, and like this game I want's not here, and why? Like when do they come? Why don't I know how many come every month, right? Where it's like,
yeah, that's true.
On PlayStation Plus, I know what I'm getting. I don't know what they are, but I know I'm getting at least 2 games, right? That's that feels like a better investment than just being like, oh yeah, you'll get some stuff when we feel like it.
We'll kind of trickle feed it to you as and when we feel like it. Yeah, it's odd. And the expansion pack, it just kind of compounds that problem, doesn't it? Because like there's more kind of library games that you're kind of unknown about, I guess. In the unknown. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's weird. It hasn't kind of landed. And I mean, I'm an expansion pack member. That's
I am too.
part of a family plan, which makes it kind of affordable. But yeah, I don't know. They just haven't got the mix right, I don't think. It'd be interesting to see if they can change it up and maybe make it a bit more compelling. And that's something they clearly want to do because the services revenue it's an easy win for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, they haven't converted enough as I think they would have liked. But that was the kind of last thing I wanted to touch upon because I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, it is, and I don't know what the solution is. I don't know how they solve it other than what we've talked about, which is, I guess, just like greater transparency, more releases, but like that costs money, and are they gonna?
Yeah, I don't even know if it's a case of like, do you really need 2 tiers for this system? Do you really need to nickel and dime for the extra few bucks every month?
Right.
Just meet us in the middle and give us everything. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, like make the base price a little bit more and just give us all the features or whatever. But yeah, I don't know.
Because people would pay that, I think. I mean, you just have to look at the PlayStation stuff. I think I don't even know how it works, but the PlayStation kind of configuration seems really confusing to me in terms of how many tiers they've got.
Yeah, it's
and it's
free,
like just
and
messy.
It's ridiculous, and like having to explain it or understand it, it's like it's so complicated. And I really feel like everybody should you got to do the Game Pass thing. It's like this is what it costs. Oh, if you want PC as well, it's $5 more. Great, like that's easy to understand. And like,
exactly.
The value is clear, whereas with this, it's like, is any DLC even going to come out this year? Like that like what games are they going to add that I want to play? If I already played the games I wanted to play, should I even, like, you want to make it in.
Do you think the Tears of the Kingdom inevitable DLC will be an expansion pack perk?
Absolutely not.
That's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah. And a game I already paid $70 for. I'm going to have to pay full price for the DLC when I already pay for a subscription that's supposed to give me DLC. It's like, what are we doing? Like make it a clear value prop. If it needs to cost more money to get all the DLC, I think that's what you got to do. right? That would be the
Yep.
thing that would make it, I think a much clearer ask.
Yep.
All right, so I want to close things out here, Chris. We got another question from AV who said, more generally, Chris, I want to know, what are you playing currently? What are your gaming highlights of the year so far? And how high is your hype level for Tears of the Kingdom?
Okay, well, I can answer the first two with one answer. It's Metroid Prime Remastered. That's the thing I've been
Nice.
playing lately, and it's the one I've been enjoying the most. I had vague, kind of fond-ish memories of playing that first time around. I didn't actually own it when it came out in 2003, I want to say. 2002? Was it 2000? I don't know. Anyway, whenever that came out, I didn't own it, but I had a friend who had it, and we used to kind of play it together. And like, I had fond memories of kind of trying to figure stuff out when that came out. And I've been really enjoying kind of going back to that. They've done a really good job with it, and it's just like I said, like we said earlier, it's held up really, really, really well.
It's so
And
weird
it's
that that
still
game
such
is not full price, considering how much
yeah,
effort it feels like they put into it, and then like they charge
mm,
full price for like Skyward Sword, which
they
felt like mostly just a port.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
how do
yeah,
you
that's
make
true.
these decisions, Nintendo?
Again, it speaks to their confidence in the Metroid series, doesn't it? It's
Yeah,
odd. It's odd because like yeah, Metroid versus like Zelda. I guess they just wanted to go full price. But yeah, that's what I've been playing lately. I've not finished it yet. I know like most people have blasted through it, and it takes like what, like 11 to like 15 hours or something like that. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm taking my time with it, enjoying things, trying to scan everything. It's
you've
such a
been
great game.
busy. You've been busy
Yeah,
going on vacation, doing the
yeah, I've
state
been
of
doing
the
the
Switch.
survey. Yeah, that's true, that's true, that's true. But as for Tears of the Kingdom, I gotta tell you, I was not hyped at all. I was kind of weirded out about the whole thing in terms of like Nintendo seemed to like be holding things really, really close to their
Sure.
chest for the longest time with Tears of the Kingdom, to the point where I was kind of like, "Whew, I don't know. Like, are they concerned about this? Like, all we've seen so far is some like weird car that looks like Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts. I'm a bit concerned about this game, you know." Um, and it was the 10-minute demonstration with Ayanuma that kind of got me kind of a little bit
Yeah,
more excited about things. Like, okay, there's some meat on this bone here. It's not just some DLC kind of add-on. And then you see like all the islands in the sky, and then what's clearly dungeons beneath, and it's like,
yeah,
okay, this world is like 3 times the size. And I spent the longest time in 2017 just getting lost in this world. You know, playing the game and actually, completing it wasn't the goal.
no,
Exploring was the
yeah,
goal, actually just seeing what's over that hill, what's over that hill, what's over there, what happens if I do this? The kind of chemistry system of that original game where you can just mess around and see what works is what kind of spoke to its kind of enduring kind of um legacy, I guess is the right word, because
yeah.
every couple of weeks you would see some clip on Twitter of usually some Japanese player doing something insane in the game. And you're like, oh my God, I didn't know you could do that. Oh, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could do that. And then you'd want to go in and mess around and try again and just play around in that world. And yeah, the fact that that kind of gameplay demonstration kind of got me thinking about all of the stuff we're going to see on Twitter in the next 2, 3 years.
Yeah.
Just got me kind of excited for it. And then we had the trailer, which kind of stood up to that kind of same quality of the 2017 trailer. And I was like, okay, I need to go pre-order this game immediately. So yeah, my hype went from pretty darn low to pretty high in the space of 2 weeks. So they got my money.
All the previews dropping today have me even more excited. I
Yeah.
saw Jason Schreier
You're
from
gonna have to film it. You're gonna have to fill me in here. The only thing I've seen is like scant bits on Twitter. I haven't read anything other than like something about the controls being a bit convoluted.
Yeah, I've heard that some of it is a little bit wonky, which is, I think, kind of my one concern. I saw him
Mhm.
say that as well. But Jason Schreier from Bloomberg said something where he said that he's pretty confident that the world is like a pretty significant amount larger than Elden Ring, which is like, oh,
Wow.
okay, so this game is massive. Like, it's
Yeah.
somehow
I
even
think
bigger and badder than Breath of the Wild.
what's interesting is the fact that because they're using the same world as Breath of the Wild, they've had 6 years to just really kind of get creative with it and
Yeah.
like just build up. They haven't had to build an engine. So they've had so long to just kind of refine whatever this is and
Make
whatever we're about to
moments.
go into here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to see kind of what they do with it because they've had such a long time and such a kind of freedom to play within the world that we're already familiar with that I think it's going to be wild, man.
It's so exciting to see them get the opportunity to learn from the mistakes of one of the most flawless games I've ever played and be like, okay, now how do we
Yeah,
up the ante?
that's
It's
true.
like, all right, yeah, like
Yeah,
show me,
yeah.
because I'm confident you
I
got it.
mean, yeah, we've spent the past half decade, haven't we, seeing a ton of other games kind of think, oh, we need to steal that from Breath of the Wild. We need to steal this from
Right.
Breath of the Wild. So, um, yeah, they blazed the trail, man, and they're going to do it all over again with this one for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt.
Hyped. I'm all like a week away, 2 weeks away.
Yeah,
Something like
yeah. It's
Yeah.
every day it feels just a little bit. It's like, oof, man. Like we are just a kiss away from it being a reality, and it's wow, what an exciting time for sure. So yeah, Chris, thank you again for joining us here, man. Always a pleasure to have you on. We'll have to have you back on sooner than next year. And I know we're already cooking on plans to get you on the Steam Deck podcast. So definitely looking forward to chatting with you again soon. Before we go, let the kids know again where they can find you, where they can find the newsletter.
Sure. It's over at switchweekly.com. And if you want to see some occasional Simpsons memes, then you can follow me on Twitter at Chris Brandrick. So yeah.
And we'll have links to all of Chris's stuff down below. So make sure you go show him some love. Go subscribe, and make sure you check out Switch Weekly. So thank you guys again for joining us here in another episode of Nintendo Noise. Remember, if you want to go and follow us on all the places we are all over the web, head over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you can find our Patreon, you can find our Discord, you can find our email address right into the show. However you choose to get involved, we thank you for tuning in to another episode of Nintendo Noise. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Chris. We'll see you next week.
Bye.